We're just watching the clock.
Yeah, that's the only thing. Yeah, all four days.
Okay, we've reached the magic hour, so I'll call the meeting to order. And roll call shows that Councilor Grenier, Councilor Wingard, Councilor Mitchell, Councilor Osher, Councilor Robertson, and Councilor Perry are present. And Councilor Gardner is joining us remotely tonight. We have a regular November council meeting tonight. We are going to follow that with a brief workshop on the fluoridation issue. And we're going to end the evening with an executive session. So we have a full night. Any adjustments to the agenda?
Not from me.
No adjustments. Just remind folks that we again are not using the chat function in Zoom, and if people, there's an opportunity to participate and people want to, they need to do that by the raising hand function. Okay, public hearings, oh, excuse me, approval of the minutes of October 18th. Could I have a motion to approve, please?
Could I just say, there's only one thing that I would want to change for the minutes,
Okay.
and that was in the acknowledgements last month, it was Ivan Fernandez. I think the minute says Ida Fernandez. So if there is an Ida, okay, that's awesome. But I think Ivan was the one who was.
Great. So motion to approve with that correction. Moved and seconded by Laura. Any further discussion on the minutes? All those in favor? I guess we do a roll call vote, Nancy,
So
since we have a remote.
Megan cannot hear us.
Uh,
Val, can you hear us?
I can hear you guys fine. Megan's speaker might be muted.
Megan, are you
Megan,
with us?
can you hear us now?
Well, let's move on with the roll call vote on the minutes,
She's gonna drop off and come back in,
Yep.
so I just.
which is not a problem. Nancy, you do the roll call vote on the minutes, please.
Council Perry,
In favor?
Councilor Garten, no. Councilor Osher,
Favor.
Councilor Robertson,
In favor.
Councilor Grenier,
In favor?
Councilor Wingard,
In favor.
and Councilor Mitchell.
Yes.
Councilor Gardner,
She got that.
Okay, we're just gonna have to
Yep.
move on.
that's fine.
Moving on to public hearings, public hearing A, to consider a victualer's license for DMCP Group LLC doing business as Dunkin' Donut, 3 Stillwater Avenue. And Patrick.
Hello, this is Patrick Esty, Code Enforcement Officer, and I'm also representing police and fire and our town clerk with staff.
Yeah.
And staff has completed all inspections and is recommending approval.
Thank you, Patrick. Any questions or comments for or against this? None. Then we'll close public hearing A and move on to public hearing B.
Tom,
Yes.
Paul has raised his hand.
Okay.
I have allowed Paul to talk.
Paul, if you would like to comment on the public hearing for Dunkin' Donuts on Stillwater Avenue, please go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
You can.
Okay, good. Could somebody just please give me justification why Dunkin' Donuts would need a vehicular license for alcohol? I don't get it.
They don't.
No, this
There-
is just for food.
This is just a license for food.
Okay, if it's just for food, that wasn't the way I read it. So I apologize, and you can go ahead and finish that.
Thank you. All right, public hearing B, to consider a class 1 malt spiritus and Venus liquor license and victualer's license for Farnsworth Enterprises doing business as Pat's Pizza, 11 Mill Street.
And staff has completed all inspections and is recommending approval.
Are there any comments for or against the issuing of this license? Okay, then we will close public hearing B and move on to public hearing C, which is ordinance amendment to the Town of Oreno Ordinances, Chapter 8, Article 4, rental unit registration, Section 8 through 110, excuse me, 8-110 through 8-117. And this must be Kyle.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to try sharing my screen. I have a brief presentation that sort of goes over just sort of the basics as a kind of reminder, an overview of the rental registration ordinance in general. And then it touches on some of the proposed small amendments that we've looked at as part of this amendment. Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So this is just a quick overview of the rental registration sort of ordinance in general and touching on some of our proposed changes. So the general purpose and for the rental registration ordinance and having every year rental properties register with the town is mainly to monitor trends in rental properties within the town. Starts out right. The first sentence of the section, the purpose of the article is to provide for a registration program for the occupancy of certain residential rental properties located within the town, and a means to monitor trends in rental properties. So that data is really used for a few different things. It can help us map where rental properties are located, so people can use that resource on the town GIS software on the website to kind of take a look at what areas are, most concentrated with rental properties, or where certain rental properties exist versus other areas. It helps in tracking code and public safety issues. This was sort of a big part of the comprehensive plan, was making things easier for efficiency and enforceability when it comes to code and public safety issues. The rental registration is sort of a foundational piece to that, because it lets us have that underlying mapping ability to kind of attach any issues that do arise to that mapping to kind of see where things are happening and keep track of it better. The data can also help to inform new policies. If rental registrations come in and then over time, we start seeing a shift in numbers of unrelated people, or more people are renting 2 families instead of single families, or whatever it may be, that rental registration info can be the basis of creating or amending policies for the town. It's important to note that it's not a licensing program. It's simply a registration. It's made for keeping track of trends and data. There are other aspects elsewhere in the ordinance, other sections, other chapters that are designed for more enforceable action, when it comes to things like land use issues or code issues or public safety issues. The rental registration applies to all residential rental units and property in the town, except that there are a few exemptions there. So things like transient occupancy in hotels and motels, group homes and community living arrangements, nursing homes, assisted living facilities, dormitories, on-campus living, and fraternity and sorority houses. These, are identified land uses in the land use ordinance that don't follow the same rental registration because they're generally not viewed as that long-term rental living arrangement the same way your typical rental property would be that does register with the rental registration. The application process, this is one area that we were looking to kind of clean up a bit with this amendment. Previously, the language was not very specific. It just said that each year by September 1, the rental registration was due. However, we always had a practice of that being between July 1, obviously when the fiscal year starts, and then using that September 1 date as sort of the end cap of when the rental registrations would be accepted. So the new language sort of amends it to better represent what the practice has been, where it would require the registration to happen between July 1 and August 15th each year. Registration forms are provided by the town, and it requires a variety of information, including owner and property manager information, emergency contact information, a number of details about the rental property. This is really where the data collection comes in, keeping track of things like the number of rental units, number of unrelated people, location of buildings on the site, parking areas. All of this can be used to better inform whatever it is later down the line, whether it's creating a new policy or helping in an enforcement matter. That's really, the heart of that data. But as part of the amendment, we did decide to remove a few different application requirements that we thought didn't really serve the point of the data collection. Things like parking area, surface type, lot coverage, lease expiration date. Things like parking area, surface type, and lot coverage, those are land use issues. And anytime someone is proposing to make a change to a site or a lot and they need to get a permit or go before the planning board, issues like that would be covered through that process. So it doesn't necessarily make too much sense to have it in the rental registration form each year for people to have to update constantly. And one, I think, important thing that we added was adding language to cross-reference the definition of family that is housed in the land use ordinance. So a sort of common piece of the rental registration that is looked at by a lot of people is that number of unrelated people, how many people are in each rental unit. And right now that's touched on very briefly in the rental registration section. For someone just sort of glancing through that for the first time, it might not be abundantly clear why that number of unrelated people is important. So this sort of ties that by adding some language to the land use ordinance where it talks about that definition of family and what those limits on number of unrelated people are. Moving on, there is a section in the current language around the creation and operation of a rental property advisory committee. It was supposed to have been established when the rental registration ordinance was first adopted. It was supposed to be a committee comprised of rental property owners, tenants of rental units, town representatives, University of Maine representatives, and neighborhood representatives. However, the ordinance also had a provision in there that basically included an expiration date for this committee of 2010, unless it was otherwise extended by the council. So the proposed amendment that we have going forward now would get rid of this language about this rental advisory committee altogether. And the point of that isn't that a rental advisory group in some capacity might not be beneficial to the town. It might be. And, we've talked with landlords and, we've brought this up with town council at some committee meetings that, creating some sort of rental committee to operate, to discuss ongoing issues with rental properties, or just kind of keep up to date on, the current landscape of rentals in the town. Something like that might be useful and beneficial, but there's not really any need to have that language formalized in the ordinance. That's something that we do with other working groups and committees on a practice basis. And by doing it as a practice, it would really let the group be more flexible in its approach and who makes up the group. So we thought that it would be fairly safe, since this rental advisory group hasn't met at least in a number of years. I'm not sure if it ever really met, but at the very least that it wouldn't make a big difference to remove that language. And if we needed to or wanted to, we could create a practice going forward that accomplished a similar goal. One of the bigger additions to the rental registration ordinance was adding a local agent provision. This is proposed ordinance amendment includes language that would require a local agent for any rental property with an absentee owner, which is then defined in the ordinance. This is something that was specifically recommended by the comprehensive plan. And the reason that it was recommended is that I think that staff experience over the years has been that when issues or concerns do arise with a rental property, that it's generally easier to more efficiently deal with those problems and work with people when there's someone who can locally make contact and address those concerns in a more timely manner. And when we were looking through the rental registration data, it seemed like a lot of what we would consider absentee owners of rental property are already doing this as a fairly common practice. So this addition of this provision would just extend this practice to all absentee owners, really, and make it a requirement. But these local agents should be able to respond to emergencies. It should be authorized to enforce leases, serve as a point of contact for municipal officials, and have some qualification as a property manager. And finally, as we get to the end of the ordinance language, it starts to get into penalties. There really isn't any changes here. This is more of just an overview of current practice. If a rental unit is not registered by September 1st, each year the fee is doubled. If that double fee is then not submitted until or by October 15th, you start to get into civil penalties possibly applying. Other violations of the rental registration ordinance could also be subject to a civil penalty. But again, there aren't really many requirements of the rental registration ordinance. It's more of a data collection tool. So, it would be things like not filling out the form properly, not providing the proper information, things like that. It's important to note that, specific issues that people might notice or might come up with a rental property would not necessarily be a violation of the rental registration, but that doesn't mean that it's not an issue that can't be dealt with elsewhere. So, things like disorderly property, issues relating to housing code or building code, land use violations. Those all have specific sections elsewhere in the ordinance, where penalties and violations can be addressed in their own specific ways. So just important to keep that in mind, that just because an issue has to do with a rental property doesn't mean the rental registration ordinance has to be the tool for the penalties to arise from. So lastly, in summary, this amendment is really designed to keep the original intent of the rental registration as a tool to keep track of data and monitor trends. However, the amendment also tries to accomplish the comprehensive plan goal of making enforceability and contact for town officials with property owners and managers easier and more reliable. This helps address any neighborhood issues and concerns on a more timely and efficient basis. And last, it focuses on registration requirements that are important for this data collection while trying to remove some requirements that are not really as necessary and just become more of a timely burden for people year after year when they have to fill out the form. So that's the end of the presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions that people might have.
Thank you, Kyle. Questions from council members, comments? Kyle, we had an email from an Oreno resident who spoke to this item in regard to Dirigo Pine. Have you had a chance to review that?
Yes, so it has been the town's practice and interpretation that Dirigo Pines, even though it's a little bit more of a unique situation in how the ownership is done, where it's sort of you own a share in a cooperative, that we would still consider something like that an owner occupant. And Dirigo Pines hasn't in the past been required to take part in the rental registration, and they wouldn't going forward. When you look at that section in the rental registration ordinance that talks about the certain uses exempt from registering as a rental, none of those things would be considered owner occupants, where something like a unit in Dirigo Pines, we still would consider them an owner occupant. So we wouldn't really sort of at the foundational level consider that a rental. So we wouldn't consider that this ordinance applies to anyone there in the first place, unless one of those owners decided to, rent out their unit to someone else. Then it would sort of open up being treated similarly to other units being rented out under the rental registration. I don't know, Sophie, if you have anything else to add, but that's my understanding.
Oh, I think you summed our conversation up very well.
Thank you. Other questions or comments?
We have a hand up.
Okay. Who is it? I cannot
We have
see this.
Paul with his hand up.
Okay. Paul, go right ahead.
Yes, thank you. At last I asked the town planner if these do not include property that is located on the University of Maine. Who is responsible to enforce these types of ordinances for those properties, considering the fact that most of those properties, the owners reside out of state?
So I can say that I think the reason that things like dormitories or on-campus living don't take part in the rental registration is because the rental registration was used or created as a tool to keep track of housing occupancy sort of within the town and within the town's neighborhoods. The concern, I think, was that you have a potentially large number of rental properties, taking away from housing units that could be used for owner occupied residents. So it was important to monitor those trends in rental properties to see if there were any significant changes happening, to see how those rental properties were being used. On campus, that those same neighborhoods don't exist on campus. So, that was really the reason that it wouldn't apply somewhere like that. As far as abiding by codes, all of the other town ordinances around building code and housing code and land use issues would still apply to anything on campus, just the same.
The properties that I'm talking about are the ones that are located on Park Street off campus.
Those are not
Okay.
university owned.
Those large student apartment complexes do abide by the rental registration forms and fill out those forms each year.
And if the owners live out of state, how do you enforce that?
Well, they have local property managers for the most part, which is why that we also included in this amendment a provision to say that any, sort of what you're talking about with out-of-state owners, they would be required to have some sort of local property manager to respond to any issues that come up.
I don't believe those ones on Park Street have anybody on site.
So Kyle,
We need to move on. Those
Okay.
properties all abide by our rental registration.
Yep.
Anything else from committee? Okay, we will close public hearing C and move on to acknowledgements by council members. And let's begin on my right with Cheryl.
Yes, I would like to acknowledge, I don't have anyone specific to acknowledge, but this weekend I put out a call for some students who were in need, and the town responded. And I want to acknowledge all of those people that came forward and helped out with some students on campus that had just recently moved here from another country and did not have anything in their apartment. And it was refreshing, and it was wonderful to feel that our community comes together when it needs to come together. And I just want to say that just makes me remember why I'm here. And so thank you for everyone who stepped up. I appreciate it. Even the town stepped up. So
Very nice.
thank you so much.
Thank you, Cheryl. Councilor Ocean?
I just want to acknowledge the great send-off that was given to Chief Ewing on Friday. I saw it posted, and I just was so glad that he was feted for his great service to our town. And acknowledge him, and be grateful that we were able to have him serve Oreno for so long.
Excellent. Councilor Wingard?
We recently had 2 big days in the town of Oreno. We had an election in which staff and volunteers really stepped up to help make it run smoothly. I think we had around 1,900 people vote in an off-year election without any candidates running, so that was quite a crowd. And also, it was open dump weekend, and Public Works did an amazing job organizing and directing that process, where they probably saw more business than they're used to. It's already twice.
Councilor Mitchell?
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge a local athlete, Ruth White, who received a national recognition for her cross country through Oreno High School. And just wanted to share that. And then acknowledging the University of Maine field hockey team on winning the America East Championship. And I wanted to encourage and recognize the RSU 26 for taking part in their own diversity, equity, and inclusion audit. And there's a survey out for parents and community members and students that are participating in that as well. So hopefully people will partake in that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Brennan?
Quickly, I just want to remind everybody that November is Native American Heritage Month, so I'd like to recognize our community.
Councilor Gardner?
Yes, I never thought in my life I would be so excited about free dump weekend, but here we are. It's like the most wonderful time of the year. Anyway, we availed ourselves of that as well. Thank you to Public Works. But I wanted to acknowledge Karen Martin, RSU 26, PCHC. Today was the first day of the vaccine clinic at the RSU. I was, I'm not sure if it was a good thing or a bad thing, but I was there because I did have to provide some support for my little boo-boo who got her vaccine today because she's pretty scared of needles. But the staff and the volunteers and the school staff were all great. And it was just such a, it was very touching to be there and just seeing all the kids, getting their vaccines and then having a juice box and playing, and parents were all there to help their kids through it. And everybody there was just such a positive, hopeful feeling in the room. And I'm just really grateful that we had that opportunity to get our kids vaccinated.
Great. Lots of acknowledgements for RSU 26, but I'd just like to mention the cross-country teams. Both boys and girls won state championships this fall, and that was pretty impressive, as well as sportsmanship awards. I would also like to sadly acknowledge the passing of former Oreno High School principal Kathy Knox, who was principal during the entire time, I guess, or almost the entire time that I served as superintendent, and was a very excellent person to do this. Okay, let's move on to unfinished business. I don't think we have any unfinished business. And consent agenda, could I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Move approval?
And a second, please. Moved and seconded. Roll call vote, please.
Yes. Council Perry,
In favor.
Council Gardner,
In favor?
Council Osher,
In favor?
Council Robertson,
In favor.
Council Grenier,
In favor.
Council Wingard,
In favor.
and Council Mitchell.
Yes.
And the vote is 7 in favor and there are none opposed.
Thank you. Moving on to new business. Order 21-204, order approving an ordinance amendment to the town of Oreno's ordinances, chapter 18, land use section 18-152, mobile food vendors, to amend the permitting process for mobile food vendors operating on the university in the university district. And I believe Kyle is going to take this one.
Yes. This ordinance amendment has,
A second, Kyle. I'm reminded, I didn't get a motion, and I should have gotten a motion. So I could have a motion to approve, and then we'll have discussion.
Move approval.
And a second.
Second.
Thank you. Go ahead, Kyle. Sorry.
thank you. Nope, no problem. So this ordinance amendment is now gone through council committee for initial discussion, planning board public hearing, and council public hearing. As we've been over this several times, I won't kind of go into the details, but if anyone has any final questions, I'm happy to go into it.
Any questions from the council? You ready for a vote? Let's have a roll call vote, Nancy.
Council Perry,
In favor?
Council Gardner,
In favor?
Council Osher,
In favor?
Council Robertson,
Yeah, in favor.
Council Grenier,
In favor.
Council Wingard,
In favor.
Council Mitchell.
In favor.
And the vote is 7 in favor and there are none opposed.
Thank you, Nancy. Moving on to order 21-205, order approving a contract zone agreement for 163 Forest Avenue to change the zoning of the lot from low-density residential to economic development zone to allow for a medical office, counseling office within the existing structure on the lot. Motion to approve, please,
Move approval.
and a second.
Second.
Thank you. And Kyle, is this you again?
Yes,
Thank you.
my last item. So once again, this contract zone agreement, their contract zone agreements are treated the same way any zoning amendment or land use amendment would take place. This has gone through initial council committee discussion with the applicant providing an overview of what they were looking to do. We drafted the contract zone agreement, went back to committee. It then went to planning board public hearing. The planning board had no recommendations to make to council for any changes. It went through a council public hearing as well, where no recommended changes were suggested. So yeah, now we're looking to get the final adoption for the agreement so that it can be signed and the applicant can start operating their counseling business.
We were enthused to have them in town, and we've had a lot of discussion on it.
Yes.
Any further questions from council members? We're ready for a vote? Then let's do a roll call vote.
Council Perry,
In favor?
Council Gardner,
In favor?
Council Osher,
In favor?
Council Robertson,
In favor.
Councilor Greenhill,
In favor?
Council Wingard,
In favor.
and Council Mitchell. And the vote is 7 in favor and there are none opposed.
Okay.
Thanks,
Order
everyone.
21-206. Order setting December 13th, 2021 at 5 p.m. as the date for a public hearing to consider amendments to the Orono Town Charter. Motion to approve the order.
Move approval.
And a second. Who seconded it? Sophie, I think this is you.
This is me. We had a brief discussion about this at the last committee meeting. Last year, the state of Maine decided to call a primary election right the week before our annual municipal election. And when we looked at the charter, thinking that it would be awesome if we could just move ahead a week and have one election, we learned that we could not do that because the charter very specifically prescribes the date. I came to council and asked if councilors would have any interest in trying to give council some authority to be able to move an election if to align with a state election if it was called within a certain period of time. At the meeting, I suggested 30 days. I think that got chopped down a little bit, but I'm not sure how many days. So that's one thing we'd want to talk about. We also discussed kind of the time frame for this. So if we call this public hearing, we'd have the public hearing on the 13th. Out of that public hearing, right following that would be an order that would allow you to send this question to referendum, and it would appear on the March election ballot. The March election is the only time that this question can be considered. It has to be the annual municipal election. So after our discussion, I followed through with what I said I was going to do and talked to the town attorney. He confirmed the time frame is my timeline is on point. And I asked about the idea of minor amendment as opposed to a revision. So if you do a revision, your council's required to seat a charter commission, and it's a much longer process. And he agreed that moving the date of the annual municipal election is a minor amendment. It doesn't matter if it's moving it within just a few days of what it is now, or if it were to move it until November, which was also discussed at our committee meeting. So out of tonight, I think I have 3 questions for you. Are you interested in moving this forward? Actually, maybe only 2 questions. Are you interested in moving it forward? And if so, when do you want to hold it? What kind of authority do you want to have? Do you want to move it to a date certain? Do you want to give yourself a window that you could call the election within? Those are my questions. I'm looking to try to get enough information that I can write up the full language for you to consider in December.
Laura?
Question, when does the state announce the timing of theirs? Like how far back would people get notice of a potential change?
Yeah, I think the state announced in like November or December. It takes several months to get an election, a state election calendar.
Cheryl?
Yeah, so what would be the benefits or maybe the challenges of a date certain versus a window within?
So when I say a date certain, I guess I was primarily talking about either June or November. So a date you already knew that there was going to be a state election likely called. Or a window being if they announce that there's going to be an election within a certain number of days of our election, that you would have the authority to be able to move them. The town attorney and I did talk at some length. He proposed language that said the council shall. I pushed back on that. I think I want to give council the authority to do it, but not a directive, because there might be some reason that you wouldn't want to pull it in one direction or another. I don't know what that would be, but I prefer to leave as many cards in your hands as possible.
So would a window would then be more flexible in in this instance?
So I think ultimately when we have when you want to recommend that we have elections is 100% a policy decision. When I look at the ability to see that a primary election is going to be called or a special election is going to be called and align something within a few days, it feels like things are generally staying the same. If you were going to look at the moving our election to align with June or November, I think you'd want to talk about the political environment for that and whether that adds or detracts from your goals with the election, I guess I would say. I don't know, did I answer your question?
Other comments or questions? Town manager looking for direction, so let's see if we can give her some. Laura?
So what you were just describing, the difference between the, like, you move it, it can be moved if it's within 15 days of March versus we're moving it to June or November. Does that need to be, do we need to give direction on that today? Because it's, or do you go to December? Like, yes, we want to move forward, but we're not sure. And then you decide.
So for December, we should have at least, we might change words, but we should have the general tone, tenor, idea. I wouldn't want to go into December saying 30 days and coming out with we're moving it to November. That's a really big swing.
Well, so this was a problem because, or a challenge for our town, because the state switched to having a primary and it still had a caucus. So there was a lot going on related to elections, and that will happen again because that's the beginning of the time of having a primary and a caucus. But that won't happen in 2022. Right? That happened in, or will it? No. Is that so? It didn't happen this year.
It's every four, it would be every 4 years.
It's every 4 years. We're doing this to prepare for the future, not this coming March election, but for a future election.
We are doing this to give you the authority to be able to move. So it's not just the primary election. Before that, we had a special election because Aaron Frey was appointed to be the Attorney General. Yeah, Attorney General. And we needed to have a special election. We advocated a lot to try to get it on the day that it was there. We spent an awful lot of time arguing with Augusta. We almost ended up right back in the same position as we were a few years later. So it's not just the one primary, it's happened before.
So if we moved, we decided we wanted to, because we had, even without anyone on the ballot, 1,900 people coming to vote now. And when we have people on the ballot in March, it might be a good year when we have 600 people coming to vote in our March election. And so in a goal of increasing the participation in democracy and making it easy for people who already participate in the November election, participate in the democracy of voting on our school board and our town council, if we moved it to November, we'd still want our language to say that we should have flexibility. Or if, I guess I'm trying to get clarification, if we move it to November, our charter is not tying us to anything in March. And so if the state comes up with some kind of special election date, it's not going to interfere with something we're doing in March, because we wouldn't be doing elections.
Yep.
Also. What does moving our election to either June or November do to the seating of new candidates in the length of term?
Kind of changes the entire cycles that we have set up, where right now somebody gets seated on council, and if they choose to avail themselves of the process, they then go through the budget process, which has lots of information about how we operate, what services we provide. You know, it's a good introduction to town government. It also allows people to understand what went into that budget, and which helps then make, I think, choices down the line. As far as the RSU, I can't speak to the RSU. I don't know what that would mean, but it would be change. And you know as well as I do, anytime there's change, there's good aspects of it and challenges that come with change. The piece, I think November becomes quite challenging in terms of seating new councilors right before the holidays. I think we kind of are midway through our work plan. Our plan moving forward is to kind of be working through our work plan in January, February, which if people are interested in council would be a great opportunity for them to kind of participate with that process. I don't know. I think there are all sorts of, I think, pros and cons, and I'm going to let Councilor Perry talk to them because they're not operational.
I think there are good arguments on both. I think Lori makes a good argument for November, and it's a good argument for keeping it in March. I guess where I am is I'm back to the original suggestion of giving us the flexibility in March to change our election date if there is a state election occurring, and I'd even go back to the 30 days. I could live with that. I think that I would like to see that be our order for further discussion on in December. I don't think I would not be in favor of changing the late winter, early spring municipal election without some real discussion with the RSU and how that impacts them. And I think you make a good argument about the budget season and what a good time for the people to come in when we're working on that. Megan, I didn't see if you had your hand up. I know you have any comment on this.
Yeah, I actually was gonna say some things similar to you, Tom. I would also be in favor for the December public hearing to be looking at the ability to shift that March election within 30 days. I don't, so on the one hand, I mean, I can definitely see the argument for, oh, if things are on a November ballot or on a June ballot, then there'll be greater participation. But on the other hand, the two things that I kind of weigh against that are, one, I was in the building for almost the whole day during that March 2020 presidential primary election, and we had lines out the door all day long. So I know that in March, people can be motivated to vote in an election if they really feel like they have something they want to say in that ballot booth. So I know that maybe a lot of folks don't come out for the municipal election as compared to the November. But I think what I learned from watching the March 2020 presidential primary election is that maybe some folks don't feel like they really have a horse in the race for the RSU and the town council, but they may be interested in national politics. So I know that people can get out to the polls in March if they choose to. And then the other thing is, and Sophie sort of spoke to this from an operational perspective, but from an operations perspective and from a political perspective, switching the municipal election, it would be a very big change. And kind of like Tom was saying, I think that would be even if our lawyer gave us the green light to not have to have a charter commission for that type of change, it still feels like a very, very big shift in operations and just the flow of what people are used to in the town. So I think it's a much bigger conversation than, us just kind of deciding to do that right now. So for me, I would be in favor of discussing shifting the March election, having the ability to shift the March election.
Other questions, comments?
Both you and Meg have said basically what I was going to say. So I'm the same mindset.
I prefer the flexibility of allowing a March election to be aligned with the state election. One of the things I really like about our town election is that it's intentionally nonpartisan in that I think it preserves some of that sense of the community coming together for the good of the community. So it's true our participation is lower often, but I don't know, I think that is something unique about it.
It's like a town hall. I'm in favor of flexibility as well.
So I'm seeing a majority of folks providing you with the feedback that I think you needed. Is there any other comment on this? Okay. So we are ready to vote on the motion, and the motion is only to set the public hearing for consideration. Right?
Yeah, I'll just bring language that reflects what the
Yes.
majority.
So let's vote on that order. And Nancy, please.
Counselor Perry,
In favor?
Counselor Gardner,
In favor?
Counselor Osher,
In favor?
Counselor Robertson,
In favor.
Counselor Greener,
In favor.
Counselor Wingard,
In favor.
and Counselor Mitchell.
Yes.
And the vote is 7 in favor and there were none opposed.
Thank you. Order 21-207, order setting December 13th, 2021 at 5 p.m. as the date for a public hearing to consider ordinance amendments to the Town of Oreno Code of Ordinances, Chapter 14, Fire Prevention and Protection. And is that Sophie or is that
How about a motion?
motion, please, to approve?
So
Second.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
As the chief and I worked through some restructuring in the fire department, it became very apparent to us that chapter 14, which is fire prevention and protection, has some elements in it that are either no longer valid in the way that we do business or just simply don't represent the chain of command, even before. So what we are doing right now is carefully going through, looking at making some minor amendments to that, proposing it for you because of our bargaining. This is a bargaining unit. We really need the ordinance to align with our policies and the contract. So we'd like to have you call the meeting, call the public hearing today for next month. We will bring the changes to you in committee between that now and then.
Great. Any question or comment? Pretty straightforward. Ready for a vote?
Yep.
Nancy,
Council
please.
Perry,
In favor?
Council Gardner,
In favor?
Council Osher,
In favor?
Council Robertson,
In favor.
Council Grenier,
In favor?
Council Wingard,
In favor.
and Councilor Mitchell.
Yes.
And the vote is 7 in favor and there are none opposed.
Order 21-208, order authorizing the town manager to expend up to $7,750 from the approved FY22 fire department budget for emergency repairs to engine 1, number 241, provided by Autotronics LLC of Madawaska.
Move approval?
Second?
So oftentimes I have a chance to talk with you about these emergency repairs in committee before they go on the consent agenda, and you just confirm them because I have already moved them through the process. This particular case came up last week. I didn't have a chance to get it in front of the committee. So this was a repair hydraulics? No.
Diesel exhaust fluid.
Say that again without the mask.
Diesel exhaust fluid.
Diesel exhaust fluid. And anytime you start trying to do repairs to a fire engine, it costs a lot more than you would like. But I put this on the agenda because I only have the authority to expend $5,000 at a time. If it's an emergency in the past, you have simply confirmed it.
Chief, is the engine in use now?
The engine is in use right now, but it's in a state where it could potentially fail. And when it fails, what it will do is it will go into a low idle type scenario. So you won't see a failure of the engine. Or if it were at a fire scene pumping water, it will still pump water at its capacity. It has to do with that processing of that diesel exhaust fluid when it leaves. And part of the regeneration system of that, if we don't repair the system, it will go into that what's called limp mode. That's what it'll stay until it repairs it.
Will that repair be done in Madawaska or here or?
No, it'll be completed right in Bangor, their satellite facility in Bangor.
Great. Thank you.
Sure, it's Madawaska.
Any other questions? Ready for a vote?
Council
Roll
Perry,
call. In favor?
Council Gardner,
In favor?
Council Osher,
In favor?
Council Robertson,
In favor.
Council Grenier,
In favor?
Council Wingard,
In favor.
Council Mitchell.
Yes.
And the vote is 7 in favor and there are none opposed.
Thank you. And the last order 21-209, order authorizing the town manager to allocate $13,500 from the FY22 overlay account to the police department budget for wages, and further to confirm a 6-month employment contract with Joseph Rogers of Winniport, Maine, for public safety consulting services. And I think that is Sophie. Oh, motion, yes.
Move approval?
Thank you.
Second. So when we talked about restructuring in the public safety departments, police and fire, I talked to you about the fact that we had one last piece of the plan, and that was to engage this public safety consultant. And the reason it is a 6-month employment contract, wanted to put him under contract because he's a retired police chief slash director of public safety. He is, so he's not somebody who does consulting with a, puts a shingle out and has all the insurances. So he has to be a town employee to be covered appropriately. As I indicated before, Joe Rogers, folks who've been around might know him. He was in Hamden for years and years and years. He has a very impressive background, highly regarded. One of the things that he did when he was chief in Hamden is he participated in assessments of departments, so people could pay the Maine Association of Police money. They would, he would go in and do just a review of the entire department, look at from soup to nuts, policies, turnover, personnel, everything. And then they get a report back that gives them kind of the strengths and weaknesses of their departments and also some recommendations for moving forward. So that's one thing that one reason we wanted to bring him on is to do that work. Also, he has a lot of experience. He built Hamden's public safety structure. And he also has mentored several police officers going up through the ranks. And so we really want him to help us with professional development plans that will help build the leadership capacity within the police department. So talking with Joe, Joe would report directly to Chief Lowe. And he's working up to 20 hours a week. We get charged for the hours he actually works. And the maximum amount of time he would work is 6 months without coming back to it. I don't know if you need to know more.
Questions? We're aware that we needed to bring somebody on in this capacity and talk about it. And we made the change in structure. No questions? Ready for vote? Nancy,
Counselor Perry,
in favor?
Counselor Gardner,
In favor?
Counselor Oshner,
Favor?
Counselor Robertson,
In favor.
Counselor Greeny,
In favor?
Counselor Wingard,
In favor.
and Counselor Mitchell.
Yes.
And the vote is 7 in favor and there are none opposed.
Thank you again. Moving on to council committee representative reports. I'll start with finance. Let's say that at our last finance meeting, you all were in attendance, I believe. We spent most of our time talking about the creation of an environmental services coordinator. And we did this by not hiring a person in public works, and it didn't cost any more money than was already in the budget. So we were pleased with that. And then we got a very brief update on the America Rescue Plan Act, which we will continue to get at future meetings. And the update was that the final guidelines have not yet been issued and we're anxiously awaiting them. So other committee reports. Terry, do you have something?
No, we didn't meet as part of that group.
Megan?
Yes, we had a couple of items in our last all committees meeting. The first was the discussion of a proposed expansion of the village commercial zoning district so that it would include the Oreno Public Library as potentially a way to do a cost-effective and attractive to the neighborhood expansion to the library at some point that would require the library be able to build closer to the lot line on the street side. So that matter was referred to the planning board for a public hearing. And after that, the planning board will send its recommendation and back and we'll discuss it at another committee meeting. And then we discussed next steps for council to address concerns voiced related to the livability of certain neighborhoods or areas within the town of Orono. This is an ongoing conversation about, various conflicts and issues going on in different neighborhoods and how we can all best kind of work together and live together to solve these problems and be harmonious. So we are going to do a neighborhood meeting. It's a staff level meeting, though a couple of counselors, I believe it'll be myself and Counselor Wingard joining in just to listen for the residents of the Webster Side neighborhood. That will be happening at the beginning of December. And that is that.
Thank you, Megan.
Megan, will that meeting be, will you publicize that meeting at the beginning of December so that all the residents know?
So,
Or will it post-
I'll let Sophie.
so our plan, so Megan and Tom both have the benefit of me proposing a path forward. So our plan is, actually Chief Lowe and I are going to co-facilitate the meeting. We're going to invite all property owners, so people who have property, and also turn around and do the very same invitation to current residents so that we can get renters as well, because that's one of the complaints that we've gotten in the past. That invitation will give a brief, some brief background about why we'd like to meet with them, and make it very clear that this is a meeting where we are looking to identify concerns and be able to understand with some specificity what those concerns are, so that we can make some recommendations to council when we report back what those concerns are.
Any other questions on that? Okay, thank you, Megan. Cheryl, you have some report on
Yes.
Environment Committee.
And one of the committees that the council doesn't know about. So we met on, I'll take that down. We met October 27th. And the committee had a couple of things that we talked about. Primarily, we talked with Joe Madigan, WPCF director, and about a climate adaptation plan for Oreno's for WPCF that came out in June, I believe, a consulting plan. We discussed the combined sewage overflow, whereby we've had 3 CSO events this year. And in years past, they were much less. I think somebody said 1 in 5 years. Now we're looking at 3 sewage overflow
We went
per year.
almost 5 years without
one.
any.
Right.
And the one thing I will say is that the 3 events are really 2 events, but one of them happened over midnight, so it gets counted as 2.
As 2 events.
And the other thing I would just,
Yeah, go ahead.
we were working from a draft. We just wanted to get Joe in front of the committee before Joe retired.
So that's, yes, which was good. So the plan that all committee members had in advance addressed, it was a future plan for decisions related to WPCF, related to combined sewage overflow, related to infrastructure. It included a priority for council to think about and the town. It included the cost of remediation for these climate events. And it also included a timeline for infrastructure, when these things needed to be done and how important they were in the overall picture of climate change and what's happening to the infrastructure, not just in our municipality, but all over the state. And so being part of that, that movement forward to really address issues that are happening right now. These aren't issues that are going to happen in the future. These are issues that are happening right now due to the high number of climate-related events, wind and water. So we had a really nice discussion about that. We did some updates on some community sustainability projects. The window dressers is happening now. And so I just came from there to committee meeting, setting up gear, and the window inserts isn't necessarily part of a town project, but it is happening. It's one of 37 projects that are happening around the state. Oreno is one of the hosts of window inserts, and hopefully we'll be helping some low-income residents keep their homes warm this winter and save some money on oil. We had opportunity for public comment. Maine Recycles Week will happen October 15th. We talked about that. We're looking at more of a bike fix-up. And then Oreno Thrift Shop was mentioned as part of the part of Maine Recycles Week. Oreno is also one of the municipalities participating in a state event. We have added Jeff Wingard to the committee. So I'm excited to work with him moving forward. And our next meeting will be November 17th.
Thank you,
Anything else? I think that's it.
Okay. Moving on to a Greektown manager's report.
I have a.
Oh, excuse me.
So some of you know, I represent the Maine Municipal Association in the Maine Natural Resources Conservation Program. So the Maine Natural Resources Conservation Program is a group of individuals, mostly that work for the state. So there's someone from the Army Corps of Engineers, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and then and U.S. EPA. But then the state people are the Maine Department of Environmental Protection has a representative, Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, Marine Resources, Maine Natural Areas Program, Maine Department of Transportation, and then there's also a representative on this committee from Maine Audubon, and of course me from Maine Municipal Association. So I've only been on 3 years. It's been going on for a much longer time. There was someone in the Maine Municipal Association's staff that staffed this committee. When they retired, they put it out as a call to all people who worked for towns, municipalities, who would want to be involved. And since I used to work as a land manager that was responsible for delineating wetlands so they wouldn't get trounced when I worked for the federal government, I knew a lot about this. So in other words, when people do development, often wetlands, even very small ones, can get highly impacted. And way back when I worked for the federal government, we used to just tell people how they should behave. And this wetland still got trounced. And we had that here in Oreno, which sometimes it happens with timber sales. You know, that they say stay away from this area and it gets trounced. So now the new program is, if there's wetlands identified in the area that's going to have development, you just have to pay into a fund because we just assume you're going to trounce it. And so there's money that's available that other people would say, states, land trusts, municipalities, land trusts would say, we want that money to preserve wetlands, to improve wetlands. And so there has to be a committee that manages how that money gets allocated. So this was the biggest year ever. So in the course of this program, they've given away $31.5 million. That money comes from the developers, gets held in trust, basically by Maine Audubon. They manage this process without having a vote on the committee. Maine Nature Conservancy. So they manage the process. And so $31.5 million come into the program. Over 20 million has been awarded for 131 projects. Usually we get about 23 requests. This year, 30 proposals. It was a very big year. We met first, we reviewed them all. We discussed them on October 2nd, beginning of October. And then that way we could ask questions of the people who applied and say what we thought might be problematic in their proposals. Could they upgrade them, give us more information? Then we met again on election day. So it'd be full day meetings of the committee to evaluate. And then we meet one more time between now and then, we're just finishing up our proposal of listings and prioritization of how much people have. We say, okay, you requested this much, we rated you top, we're gonna give you all the money you requested. Other times we'll say, we thought your rating was great, we just don't have that much money. And we divide it by the part of the state it's in and the kind of wetlands it is. So, so if someone, when 95 gets expanded and has extra lanes in southern Maine, it runs through a certain kind of wetlands, and that's in the southern part of the state. A lot of money goes into the fund, but people may ask for money to save land in Machias, and that's, so anyway, so it's a lot of moving parts, just like any managing any bunch of money. So I'm just giving you the details because Oreno, this is an upsized role for a town councilor, which I didn't realize Tom knows this. When I put my name in, I was so excited to participate in this, but they didn't really have, it used to be a staff job, and everyone else who's on this committee is actually paid as a staff person. It's a large time commitment. It's been really interesting. I've been glad to be participant, but I'm not going to run again, and so I'm stepping down. So it's the last, unless I want to go for it, which I don't recommend. You know, unless we had someone on our staff that they were a wetlands expert. So it's been a joy to participate in this, and it's been a great opportunity. As I think some of you know, that last year the very highest rated proposal was from the Oreno Land Trust, and it's a proud moment for Oreno that the highest rated proposal was the whole thing. So anyway, so I just wanted to give you an update that and give you a little bit of background about the program. It's impressive. Other states do this too. And we have people who come to the committee that are representing greater New England, say out of the Boston office of EPA, and they've been very complimentary about the process. And we've given them input about how we think some of the vocabulary that the state, the federal government has given to the state might change to better reflect what the people in Maine, and we have a lot of wetlands in Maine. We're a big state, we have a lot of wetlands, we have a lot of expertise. So anyway, there's my update.
Thank you for the update, and thank you for serving. Very impressive. Sophie, town manager report.
So I have stopped normally doing town manager reports during council meetings, but there are two issues that I wanted to make sure people heard about. The first, I don't know how many people are enjoying the Facebook streams of the Penobscot County Commissioners meetings, but unfortunately I am starting to do that again. And the reason is that we have some significant issues at Penobscot County Jail. So if you read the paper, you know they're overcrowded and understaffed. We know that the facility has significant issues just with the plant itself, the physical plant. I've had conversations with Sheriff Morton, who I think is trying very hard to patch things together. What is happening at the jail is most definitely impacting us on the streets here. You know, we would like to think that we are skilled and can resolve all community conflict and everybody can sleep in their beds at night. That is just not the case, that there are times that some people really need to have to go to jail. And the problem is that in our region, we've had situations where, thankfully not Oreno, but other law enforcement agencies are telling us that they've had to transport people as far as Piscataquis County, only to find that they didn't have a bed available, and then they're forced to go to Washington County. And so when you think about the way we staff here, that would be taking an officer out of responsibility for likely a shift in then some. So we're a little bit nervous about that. We do know that Sheriff Morton is working very hard to try to back us up and help facilitate process. We know that one of the things we rely on heavily is regional booking. So even if somebody doesn't have to go to jail, sometimes they need to go through the booking process. And in the past, we could just drop them, transport them down to the county, and the county took care of the booking and the bail. with the issues at the jail, there's some, we are now having to take on some of those responsibilities. So staff is being trained to be able to do that effectively. The Brewer City Council went before the county commissioners last Tuesday. I happened to, I was a Zoom participant, but I stayed quiet. I think the Brewer City Council is responding to all the things that I would want to respond to. We're in a situation where a new jail is going to cost a lot of money. Renovating our current jail is going to cost a lot of money. But we're, I think, at a tipping point where there is no easy fix here that's going to be cheap. And at the end of the day, the one thing the Penobscot County Jail has in its favor is they have done a tremendous job with diversion programs, with support programs, with things that would really take us beyond putting somebody in jail and just waiting. One of the other issues that we have, though, is that part of the reason that there's so much overcrowding is that prisoners that should not be in the county jail system are there because they're waiting for trial. And that it changes the complexity of who is at the jail, and it is not set up for some of those higher risk offenders. So this isn't to wave the wand and make everything better. And I don't even know that throwing $100 million at it, which I don't think we can afford, would fix it. But I do think it's important as local municipal officers for y'all to understand that there's an interconnectivity here that is going to start rippling into our community more and more. And I don't know that it's all within the county's control. I think some of this belongs with the state and the court systems and the processes that we have. So this is me not asking you to do anything, but rather simply making you aware that I am concerned about where we are with the jail. And I'm watching this and will weigh in to the degree that I can to facilitate operations as we need them here. So that's the first thing. The second thing, go from jails to constitutional amendments. So last week we had an election. That was last week, right? It was. And as part of that election, the constitutional amendment regarding the right to food passed. So we do not require a majority approval, super majority approval. It's a simple majority. The issue with that amendment, and when I say this, I am not talking about whether it's good or bad. I'm talking about the impact to us as a town government. The way that amendment was written has raised significant questions through municipal folks about what it means for municipal ordinances. We are trying to get clarity right now as to whether or not reasonable municipal ordinances, for example, yes, you have a right to food, but you still need to make sure you pen your pigs, and you still have to abide by odor rules, and you still, I mean, we don't know if reasonable municipal police powers are going to be void moving forward. So I reached out to the town attorney. I've reached out to Maine Municipal Association. They're working through their process, and I don't have any clear answers for you at this point. What I can tell you is as soon as the governor proclaims the election result, it will be the constitutional amendment goes into effect. So we don't have a lot of time. And what that might mean for us is letting some small things go and seeing what other people do. I really don't want to be the test case on about roosters in medium density residential zone. You know, I mean, I don't know if people understand the degree of control that land use had on barnyard animals and other animals that I'm not sure will continue to be there.
That was kind of a surprise, I thought. I didn't hear any play on that. No advertisements, no posters, no
Some
nothing.
editorials on it.
I'll get a Nemo.
I want to see
You
the
have to have a
recipe for the,
recipe.
you gotta have the recipe for the emo.
Is that it, Sophie, for you?
The only other item I have is on our agenda, we had said that we were gonna meet on December 6th. December 6th is the 8th day of Hanukkah. Do we still wish to meet on December 6th, or do we wish to not meet on December 6th?
It was that on our list of days,
It is.
then we should abide by it, I would think.
Okay. That's all I have.
Okay. Future agenda items, items of concern. Any future agenda items from council members? We have enough of them. Public petitions, I think we have none. Public comments. We have anybody, Bill?
Nobody has their hand raised.
Then we're going to go on to workshop. And we're going to deal with the fluoridation of the public water supply. And we had a meeting recently, heard some presentations, and I think we need to decide where we're going to go with it, if any place.
Yes.
You going to frame this for us, or?
I can. I thought you were doing a great job. So the town council was approached many, many months ago now with a request that it remove or have the process of putting fluoride in the public water supply stopped. So to cease fluoridation of the public water supply. With that request, we reached out to the water district, who let us know that they are not supposed to take a position, and they have no position. But that when we look back, we saw that the last time this question had been in front of voters was a little over 50 years ago. 50 years ago. At that point, Oreno and VZ councils called an election just based on that. And then COVID happened, and we decided we did not want to be messing with public hearings and referendum elections right at the height of COVID last year. When we went to move the election, we learned that this is an election that can only happen during a general election. So the next time we could possibly have this question in front of us would be November of 2022. With that information, both councils talked about the fact that maybe it would be good to have more information before deciding just to put something on a referendum ballot. As part of that, Mark Leonard, the manager in VZ, and I we met, we talked with representatives from the Maine Oral Health Coalition and the resident that came forward with the request. We offered both sides, pro and con, to come to a joint VZ Oreno workshop on October 25th. Maine Oral Health Coalition came with one representative and a local dentist. And the resident was able to secure a representative, I think the executive director of Fluoride Alert, the Alert Network, who is the prime opponent to fluoridation. So we had the experts on both sides at our meeting. Each presented, asked, counselors were given an opportunity to ask some questions. VZ Town Council is meeting tonight to discuss this issue. And it's on your agenda to decide whether you want to move it forward. So in order to have a municipal referendum, both town councils have to put it on the same election ballot. So it has to go at the same time. And the question before you today is not formal action. Rather, you're going to give me direction whether you want to put an order on a council agenda or you are ready to just stop the process.
Thank you. Councilors, do we want to put this on a council agenda? We heard from a couple of people at the workshop. In the sense at that point, at least from the people we heard from, the councilors we heard from, was that we were not enthused about putting it out for a referendum.
I agree.
Yeah.
That's what I got from it too.
I haven't changed my opinion. I still don't think it needs to be put out to referendum.
I think we all heard from two Oreno residents by email, both positions, and both advocating not to put it out for referendum to keep fluoride in the water supply.
So isn't it true that if there was a groundswell of support for getting this, a citizen petition could be?
Absolutely. So a couple of things, Jeff. If there was a groundswell of support and council wanted to revisit this, you can. There is no prohibition if it doesn't go to election for you, from you revisiting it anytime you want. But there is an element of the law that would allow a citizen petition to compel you to call the election. And I think it's 10% of the voters at the last gubernatorial election. So it's not an easy bar, but if it was something that the community really, really wanted, they should be able to theoretically get the vote.
So what's the number that would be? Ballpark.
700, 780, something like that.
So I reached out to Jean McCrae, who's a professor of environmental engineering, and I used to teach at the university, to come in my class and talk about wastewater treatment. So she is my contact person that I know who thinks about water. And what she said is that that she is not convinced that fluoridation of drinking water is the right way to improve dental health, which is the ostensible purpose of fluoridation. At this point, all toothpaste are fluorinated, and fluoride is only effective at improving teeth enamel when applied topically. So systematic uptake of fluoride, which is known to have some negative effects when taken orally through drinking water, is not the best way to achieve the beneficial effects of fluoridation on teeth. She said, we are adding chemical to our water that is probably not needed. It might have been needed in the 50s when it was introduced and before toothpaste generally contained fluoride, but it is not removed by wastewater treatment, and it's also corrosive and hard to work with for the operators. So she wishes that we did not have fluoridated water.
I'm curious because it sounded almost exactly how they must have the same statement. It was almost the same exact statement that guy from New York, when I found out it was from New York, that was basically the same exact thing.
Right,
she
well, this
wrote.
is what she teaches. So just as I could talk, have the same
Right.
statement about energy efficiency every time I talk to any household, it feels to me like I'm repeating the same thing. Then it's brand new. So this is, she is in the same group of scientists, researchers that believe that it's not necessary. So I'm just reading because she's an Oreno resident, and I reached out to her specifically, but then wasn't able to make the meeting. And she, but she's not spending the time trying to get a citizens referendum. But that was her advice, that it was a great idea when we understood that fluoride would be protecting teeth. But the way it's applied by having it in the water is not really addressing the goal, the toothpaste is addressing the goal, yes? That's right.
I just was gonna make a general like, I don't think, from a policy perspective, I think, and an equity perspective of people actually using toothpaste as much as it's needed, I think there's proven benefits to having it in the water. Are there cons to that there's scientific support around? Yes, but my opinion as a counselor still remains that from a policy, public health perspective, it's serving a benefit and we accept the consequences of that. Just like I accept the consequences of myself, my husband, and my whole family from the vaccine. I'm accepting the negative consequences with the public health benefits. And so that's how I'm looking at fluoridation in the water. So I don't think this should go to referendum.
Yeah, I mean, I'd also like to add, and thank you, Laura, I agree with that statement, and I made my similar views known at the last meeting, of course. I wish that gentleman hadn't left in such a huff, but there you have it. From a public health standpoint, a policy standpoint, I agree with Laura. I don't think that there's a reason to remove it from the water, but also I think it's important that we remember that our job is not to decide whether fluoride should be in the water or argue about whether it should be in the water or do our own research about the pros and cons, but rather, is this something that needs to go out to referendum for folks to vote on? And where I really come down, in addition to add on to all the things that Laura said, and in addition to that, I also want to reiterate what, and I think Cheryl and I also made this point at the last meeting, all of the public health agencies that we rely on for this information are supporting it. And I can't make my mind reconcile telling everyone to trust the CDC about masking and transmission prevention and getting the vaccine, and then turn around and say, yeah, but who knows if they're right about fluoride, let's have a vote. I just don't see the consistency there. So as long as our trusted, public health organizations, both government and the other public health organizations that operate around the world are saying that this is safe and that, that it is from a public health standpoint and equity standpoint, an important thing to be doing. I think that it's not necessary to ask the residents of the town to come out and vote on the issue.
So let's take a quick poll so we can move on here. Who is not in favor of putting this out for referendum?
Wait, not in favor of,
So are we in favor of not putting it out to referendum?
yes.
Did I say correctly?
I would say in absence of a groundswell or something. to
Stop
take-
it.
Okay.
Simpler that way.
And Laurie, you were in favor of putting it out for referendum? Or I didn't see it here.
Yeah, I always like to support individuals in our town that are trying to make changes that are hard changes to make. So yes, I support the person who requested that we put out for referendum, and that's fine to be. I'm fine being in the minority. My support of that citizen.
Okay, so I think the poll was 6 councilors wanting it not to be a referendum. And my sense is that it's going to be the same answer and easy.
That
Tonight.
is my unofficial,
Yeah.
they're having the conversation at the exact same time.
Okay.
But I will report
Great.
what actually happened.
So we ready to move out of our workshop and into an executive session?
Yes.
Yes.
So I'd like a motion to move into executive session pursuant to 1 MRSA 405, Section 6D, for discussion related to negotiation and collective bargaining agreement with IAFF Local 3106 and Maine Association of Police, Oreno Unit. We will take no official business action after the executive session. The only thing we will do after executive session is adjourn. And could I have a motion to go into executive session? Second by Jeff. All in favor? Well, we got to do the roll call.
Counselor Perry,
In favor?
Counselor Gardner,
In favor?
Counselor Osher,
Favor.
Counselor Robertson,
Yep, in favor.
Counselor Wingard,
In favor.
Counselor Grenier,
In favor.
and Counselor Mitchell.
Yes.
And the vote is 7 in favor, there are none opposed.
We did all this, so you get.
We'll take just a couple of minutes while those folks who don't need to be here leave us, and we adjust our Zoom meeting so we only have Megan with us on Zoom.
So Megan, did you get the link for the executive session?
Yes, I'm going to log out and log back in.
Yeah, give me a minute, because I have to log out of this and then into my own account. So it will take me just a minute.